Print, email, Facebook, Twitter. More the forgotten Australians. Survivors call on Tasmanian government to back redress scheme. As a child growing up in Tasmania, Pamela was raped by her father and sold by him for sex with other men in exchange for alcohol. Finally, she was removed from his care by police and put into the Mount St. Canis Residential Institution and Industrial Laundry in Sandy Bay, only to suffer further abuse. It was the 1950s and Mount St. Canis was run by nuns of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. Pamela told the ABC she was kept at the institution for a year, being released after her father died, ran away to Sydney where she was raped in a factory by a stranger, falling pregnant before being captured by police and placed in another institution. She was 16 years old. It was terrible, disgusting, 12 months of hell, Pamela said of her time at Mount St. Canis. They, the nuns, beat me up. They caught me smoking in the drying room. She, a nun, shoved me into the room, with my finger in the dryer and smashed it. I just wanted to leave. I wanted it to stop. Now aged in her 70s and living in Hobart, Pamela still bears the scars of her year in Mount St. Canis, including a mangled finger. It closed as a residential institution in the 1970s after an explosion in its boiler room killed 8 people. Its former residents are now referred to as inmates or forgotten Australians. A little bit of happiness. That's all I want. After a legal process, Pamela was given some compensation under the state government's existing redress scheme for wards of the state, and $2,000 from the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. But she is urging the Tasmanian government to sign up for the National Redress Scheme. Tasmania and Western Australia are the only 2 states yet to commit to the scheme, which is due to come into effect on July 1st. It would be just wonderful, just to give me $20,000, enough to pay for my funeral, Pamela said. Pamela's entire family lives interstate, but she said she cannot afford to visit them. I only get a pension. I've got 32 grandchildren and I've never met them, she said. They, the state government, could give us old people a little bit of happiness. That's all I want. Pamela spoke to the ABC during a meeting with other Tasmanian child abuse survivors in Hobart on Monday. The meeting was organised by the Care Leavers Australasian Network, CLAN, spokeswoman Leonie Sheedy, who is in Tasmania this week to meet survivors hoping for compensation. Ms. Sheedy will meet Attorney General Elise Archer on Tuesday afternoon to urge her to sign on to the National Redress Scheme. My interest is for the people who were the state government's children or care leavers who weren't necessarily a state ward but were still placed in an orphanage or children's home or foster care, Ms. Sheedy said. I'm looking for leadership. I'm looking for them, the government, to care about what happened to their own children, to make the churches and charities accountable for the crimes committed on children who had no one to turn to. We had no parents. We couldn't get out of those orphanages to report to the police the crimes that were being committed on us. To the Tasmanian government and the Premier, I urge them to opt in. Why are we delaying? The Royal Commission reported on redress in 2015, and why do we need to keep waiting and prolonging people's pain? They are not asking for millions, just respect and redress. Ms. Sheedy planned to visit the north of the state later in the week and said she wanted Tasmania's child abuse survivors to be aware of their rights, despite the state not yet opting into the scheme. She said while the existing Tasmanian scheme benefited some, the same survivors would be eligible to apply for a top-up on previous payments. There were many others abused within a church or other institutional setting who had never received compensation, Ms. Sheedy said, with basic requests such as having their teeth fixed, traveling to see family members, or putting a headstone on a parent's grave. The people who were abused by the YMCA or churches or schools, they will be eligible for redress, she said. They're not asking for $1 million. They're just asking to be given respect and justice and redress. You'll never be able to compensate care leavers for the damage and the crimes that were committed against them. But why is the Tasmanian Liberal Party prolonging their pain? Haven't they suffered enough? In a statement, a spokeswoman for the Attorney General said it was the government's priority to ensure any proposed scheme would be in the best interests of Tasmanian survivors. This is not a simple decision to make, and with something of this magnitude it isn't the case that we can simply opt in and deal with the details later. The statement said, to do so would be a disservice to those vulnerable Tasmanians that this scheme seeks to assist. It is also important to note that until relatively recently the government was in caretaker mode and we were not in a position to advance this matter at all at a ministerial level. It wasn't clear which issues the government was continuing to examine in informing its decision-making process. The Catholic and Anglican churches as well as the Salvation Army had also urged the government to sign onto the scheme. Ms. Archer had previously said the government could introduce special referral legislation to the Parliament to allow churches and other institutions to participate. If it did